Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I'm Sterling's Director of PR and Social Media, and also your host of Sterling Live. I'll say good morning. I'll say good afternoon. My guests here are in the afternoon, but we also have one in the morning, like me. So I will say good afternoon, good morning, good night, too, if anyone is watching during the nighttime. Great stuff there. So we have a wonderful, wonderful episode today, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. As you can see, I have three guests with me. We have today Steve Smith, President International at Sterling. Steve is obviously no stranger to Sterling Live. He was literally just on an episode with me the other day. We have Shawn, Senior Vice President, Employee Experience, Learning, and ESG at Sterling, and Jackie Handy, Speaker and Inclusive Leadership Specialist. So thank you all for joining me. I truly appreciate it. You can see our topic today at the bottom of the screen. We're going to be talking about nurturing a people first workforce by leaning into a culture of belonging. So, a really important topic, a really rich topic, and I really pulled in three of the experts to talk about it today. So, I would love for the three of you to now take just a brief moment to introduce yourselves to our audience. So, Steve, I'm going to start with you. Again, no stranger, but just in case someone doesn't know you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Caitlin. Thanks for having me back. I obviously didn't do too bad last time. Okay, so my name's Steve. I lead the international commercial group for Sterling, which includes leading Sterling's people, clients, all the way through from, well, in all the countries where we're represented, our clients are represented from the UK all the way through to Australia. So that's me.
Well, welcome back. Shawn, welcome to Sterling Live. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Happy to. I have the opportunity at Sterling to head up the employee experience team. And for us, that includes not only the events and the support we provide for our culture and culture building, but also the internal communication and how we build those connections as well. I also have the learning and development team and work in diversity and inclusion through our commitments to environmental, social, and governance. So delighted to be here with this great group of people to start our days with a lot of energy.
Absolutely. And thank you for being a part of this panel. And Jackie, not from Sterling, but an expert we needed to pull in here. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, I can. Thank you, Caitlin, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Jackie Handy. I'm based in the UK, and I'm an inclusive leadership specialist. I work with organizations both here in the UK and internationally, really helping them develop more inclusive cultures, embrace the concept of belonging, and also connection, human connection in the workplace, which I think is really important, especially in the culture, the economic environments, and the new working environments that we find ourselves in. So, looking forward to sharing more and having a really lively conversation with you all today. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for joining. If you are watching live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, if you have any questions for our panelists today, you can go ahead and put them in the comment section across all three of these platforms, and I will get them over to them as I see fit throughout the episode. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I'd like to start with talking about the state of the workplace. So Jackie, it could be easy for an organization to say that, we all matter, but labels can be more harmful than good sometimes. Can you touch on this a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting first question, actually, because, we do all matter, right? I think there's nobody that would say there are certain people that don't matter. But actually, statements like this and kind of all-encompassing labels can sometimes be problematic because it assumes a one-size-fits-all. So if you think about when we talk about the Black community, the disabled community, we talk about the LGBTQ plus community, there are individual human beings within those communities that have so much more to them than just that one label, right? And so everybody has a different need. So sometimes the label is almost too impersonal, even for an individual that would identify within that group, if that makes sense. And I think the other thing around the "we all matter" kind of statement that, again, speaks to a little bit of sometimes ignorance to those explicit needs that people have. And I don't think that comes from a bad place. I think the intention's really positive, that we want to recognize that everyone matters. But those catch-all statements can sometimes mean that we fail to really dig deeper into what makes an individual uniquely them and what therefore they need. So I hope that helps as an answer to just give my point of view really on where I sit in relation to that question. It's a great question.
Yeah, it does. And I'd love to touch on it a little bit further with you. So can you provide our audience with some strategies that can actually, reduce harmful labeling, but also foster inclusivity?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, how long have you got? I mean, there's a lot here, but
got all day.
Right. So I think for me, I could talk about a lot of these, but to make sure that everybody else also has the opportunity to speak today, I will start by really saying, get to know your people at a deeper level. So I've worked with organizations now in a learning and development capacity for over 15 years. And one of the questions I ask typically to leadership teams is, how well do you know your people? Right. And overwhelmingly, way back then and still today, people they look to the light and they wonder and they give these sometimes superficial responses as, yeah, pretty well, or yeah, we talk a lot. But actually, I would get people to really dig a bit deeper and say, do you really understand what makes your people who they are? Because identity, you can see for those people that are watching the video, there's a map of the world on my wall behind me, and that's not just a nice picture, but it's metaphorical for the fact that we all have our own unique map of the world made up of experience and identity and values and belief systems and all of these things that make us, not just with the label, but way beyond the label, right? And so if we are really going to create workforces that are engaged and truly feel like there is a belonging culture, then we need to feel seen, we need to feel valued, we need to feel safe. And so any strategies that organizations can put into place to really focus on not only educating themselves, but digging deeper and having really fruitful conversations with their people on an ongoing, consistent basis, then those are some of the great ways that they're going to start putting those foundations in place for success moving forward.
I love the accountability of really understanding your people. So bringing that question to the table to organizations and, asking, how well do you know your people? And we're going to talk a lot about today, like questions like that and really diving into that. And my next question goes into a strategy that will definitely help organizations there. So Shawn, my question is for you, and it's around employee resource groups. So these are common across global organizations, but how can we really make these groups and the ideas that are forming within them more mainstream across an organization?
Yeah, employee resource groups are a tool through which a culture can come to life, but it is something that's sort of in our quiver, if you will. My personal belief is that a company has to have a mindset and a culture that is committed to people. And, at Sterling, one of our first and leading values is it's all about the people, not just the people who we serve in the world through our clients and the candidates, but also the people who bring our strategy to life. And so with that, we need to have a people or an HR focused strategy. Employee resource groups are a wonderful way to do that because it, first of all, recognizes some communities within the greater culture of the company. And then also it invites in allies to a safe space where ideas can be shared. It can be a combination of not only group sessions, but also everyday conversations, relationship building. It's, in my view, a sort of a sharing of facts and fun where we get to learn from other experts, but also we know we can come together. They can't exist in a vacuum, though. That has to come to life every day. I loved what Jackie was saying about the conversations. I know as a leader, and someone with a background in communication. I was taught from early on, kind of an old saying of you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use the ears more. That means you got to listen a lot, and really getting to know sort of the viewpoints of everyone on your team if you can, as well as making sure that they know that they can share things with you in confidence. So I think employee resource groups, or ERGs as they're shorthanded, they're very important. They have to have a space where there are members of the community as well as allies can come together. But that's just one element when you're really trying to build a people first workforce.
Yeah, it's great. And I do think that Sterling does a very good job, from an ERG perspective, where Shawn, you had mentioned making it a daily thing. So you can have these get-togethers, you can have these larger meetings and discuss ideas and come together as, both members of the community and allies. But, it's that day-to-day, relationship building as well. And again, it's something that I love. And I think we do a very good job at it. So a part of our topic is, building that culture of belonging. So I want to move now into the idea of cultivating, this sense of belonging, this culture. So Steve, I'll start with you here. Employers must work hard to create these environments where, people feel like they belong. Can you detail a recent experience where you and your leadership team took this on?
Yeah, sure. I think you framed the question perfectly as well, right? Because it is about leadership accountability for a lot of this stuff. And it's tempting sometimes to push this down and expect some other part of the organization to own it. But as a leader, I'm accountable for the way my people are when they're at work. I guess a good example, I think, would be about 2 years ago, my role expanded to include the Asia Pacific region. So I introduced myself as leading the international team. Historically, we would have talked about EMEA, or we would have talked about APAC in isolation. What we've been able to do over the last kind of 18 months really is, I think, create a culture of belonging in what were 2 previously distinct regions. And I think the big thing to call out there is our APAC team was made up from historic acquisitions. Over a long period of time, so multiple years, they joined the Sterling family of companies, right? And but the priority at the time was business as usual. So they continued to be wildly successful, super creative, brilliant at what they were doing, but really disconnected from the core, from the whole. And so as I picked it up, I looked at it and I thought, oh, things are so different here to there, and there's so much good here, but there's also a lot of disconnection. And so we worked really hard, my leadership team and I, to bring all of that together. And when we think of belonging, that really is the story that sticks out for me. Like it looked like a whole heap of things, right? And I think that's important to note. It doesn't look like one thing. You do one thing and people belong. It doesn't look like that. But in our experience, people were disconnected through technology. So they access their emails on different domains and systems. And, it's like the way that the instant messages worked, they were separate. And so people in our APAC region really weren't technology connected into Sterling. And they weren't connected necessarily in the way they were thinking about growth and strategy. Like it was very much like they were very connected to the customer. Like that was one of the brightest things about that team when I first met them. And they were bending over backwards and solving things for customers, and the customer experience to our team was incredible. But you know what it's like when something is hard, and it always is in a services environment, you always get to the place where the best client relationship becomes challenging. They were on their own. Like they had to solve it themselves, or that was it. And so by working really hard, we integrated technology. I installed a leadership team that was truly international. So I didn't have a leader in the UK for the UK and a leader in Australia for Australia or Singapore for Singapore. I actually have a leader today in Singapore who leads client success for me across UK through Australia. So he has leaders in all those teams. And we did that with all of the functions in the commercial group. And what that did was it fostered a belonging within each function. So each leader had a team of people from across the countries, and then their teams felt connected into a bigger thing as well. So we did that through organizing principles, through technology. And I guess the other way we did it was through the building of the strategy, right? So there was a lot of work that had to get done. Probably took 9 to 12 months to kind of create the foundation. And the kind of cherry on the top of that was an exercise we went through where we went into each market, layers down into the organization and listen to the voice of the teams. Like, what are the opportunities? What are you excited about? How do you think we can grow? How much do you think we can grow? What do our clients need from us? And we captured all of this through like a strategy exercise in each market. And then we stepped back and we looked at what was in common between all of those things. And we looked for the voice of the international team. So spread across all those markets. And there were 2 or 3 things that came out so strong and that were in common across all these things. And so it was actually, after the hard work, fairly simple to go, hey team, I've heard you say we should do this, this, and this. We're going to do it. And so our strategy heading into this year, I think people belong to the strategy, right? They helped create it. They believe in it. They're connected to one another functionally, like in technology, and it's been incredible. And I'd say that's probably the brightest example that I've got. And I think the culture that's been driven out of that is wildly different to how it was 2 years ago, and super exciting.
It's a phenomenal example. I know this has been, quite the journey at Sterling. I know Shawn was involved in a lot of things. I was involved in a lot of things. But Steve, you and your team really hit the ground running and did a great job. We're still on this journey, but you do feel that culture, coming together, getting stronger, again, from all the work that you put into place. And, one of the best examples that you had said was just sitting back and listening to everyone and understanding what they wanted to accomplish, what the priorities were. And we're definitely seeing that, across the organization today. So, Steve, I'm going to stay with you. And while we just talked a little bit more broad on a global scale, I'm going to target 2 different regions within the US and the UK. So we keep talking about this word belonging. So we're seeing that, in the US, it's very common to say that, the word belonging and using it. But the UK seems to be a little bit slower to adopt this phrase. Why do you feel the concept of quote unquote belonging hasn't fully latched on yet in that region?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that I have the fullest, deepest, most thought through answer to this question. I think there's some like broad stroke stuff, right? So, I mean, I've worked with Americans for a long time. You are whoop whoop, like it's all out there. Yeah.
I think I said that this morning. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's something like in the UK, typically, I'm going to talk broad strokes because this is very anti what we're trying to do today, right? But typically, we're more reserved. We're less out there with some of these ideas and concepts, more cautious in how you move towards things compared to the US. I like, especially with things like vulnerability and intimacy. So when you use belonging, it's a familial, I think it's like a familial word to me here in the UK. We talk about belonging, I think of my closest friends. I think of my family, you think of it like that. And so it doesn't naturally make sense to apply that in the workplace. And I think probably in the UK, we're just a little bit slower to explore it, maybe a little bit more cool. What I don't think, though, is I don't think there's a lack of intent or focus. I think it's just how it's framed out. I think we recognize like a longing for more of this in the UK, and perhaps it's edging closer, just using slightly different terminology. But I think that's my sense of it. I think we're exploring it, but it feels like something maybe it doesn't fit in the workplace. And if you think about it as like, if I've got a strong sense of belonging in the workplace, and you tie that to vulnerability, and you tie that to sometimes, personally for me, sometimes work is a place to come to that is almost like an escape from some of those deep things, And so forcing those 2 things together feels challenging, I think, at times. And so going for a culture that could make people uncomfortable, encouraging some sense of closeness that doesn't seem to make sense. And I think there's a caution around that, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And I wanted to dive into it a little bit because I do know that we are hitting multiple audiences right now. So for those that are watching with this word in the title, with us keep saying it, I wanted to make sure that we did touch on that. So, and I think you described it beautifully, Steve. So I think it makes a lot of sense. So if you do hear the word belonging, this is what we mean. And we understand that in certain parts, it might not be the same thing. So I want to dive into 2 actually frameworks and 2 types of concepts. So Jackie, I'm going to come to you first. for our audience, can you describe what the A-frame concept is, and how can this be used as a tool when enhancing communication and understanding?
Sure, I can. I'd also, if I may, just build on the great example that Steve gave in relation to belonging, because from a fellow Brit on this this call, I would really what I think is one of the biggest blockers, or why perhaps the UK hasn't yet kind of latched on quite as quickly, is that belonging represents a feeling, right? And I think Steve, you were really kind of erring into that zone where linking into vulnerability. And we've talked so heavily about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they all feel like factual, activity based, etc. It's stuff that we can kind of get our heads around. We can talk about them in the boardroom, but when it comes to belonging, this is a very it's almost an intangible, although we know when it's there and we know when it's not there, right? But that's why I think it's a bit more challenging for us to talk about, because it goes into the feelings, and we know how it can be challenging to articulate emotions and how we feel. So that was just my 2 pence or my 2 cents, should I say, to add to Steve's great comment there. But exploring the A-frame. So the A-frame concept is one that I've developed. I've been working in the DEI and B space now for several years alongside my leadership development work. And I've created this concept because, as Steve talks there from a great leadership example within organization like Sterling, I talk to people about what actually we can do as individuals. So this might be from leader to team member, individual contributor to peer individual contributor. So how we can actually bring belonging to life in our day-to-day conversations, which I've already talked about the importance of those. So the A-frame, well, you can call it a metaphor for a mountain, you can call it a metaphor for a sturdy framework, however you want to describe it, but it looks like a capital A. And on one side of it is who I am. So that's who I am, my map of the world, my good, my bad, my ugly, my vulnerabilities, my fears, my successes, all of the things that make me me. But on the other side of that mountain, if you like, or that frame, is what you see. So how I show up in the world and what I bring to the world. And we talk a lot, or we have talked a lot about, bring your whole self to work, and hey, it's all about authenticity. And where, again, the sentiment is good, I actually think that, do we ever truly bring our whole selves to work? And is that a bad thing, that actually we might hold some of ourselves back? But we need to look more into why we hold back and what prevents us opening up and going over this mountain, really, from who I am to how I show up. And things that might get in our way, well, we may have things around our neurodiverse identity, for example. We might have things around our culture and heritage that mean we are less open to sharing insights about ourselves. And we also might not feel safe. And this is one of the biggest reasons that actually we don't show up as authentically, again, quote unquote, as we might wish. So what the A-frame does around the outside, it creates these, it talks about the conditions that need to be created in order to help understand somebody at a deeper level. So whichever side you're on, whether you're the person that's sharing or whether you're the individual that is extracting that information through a conversation, what do I need to consider? Of course, things like psychological safety, things like curiosity and asking great questions, things like the 2 ears, 1 mouth that we heard from Shawn there is so important, the active listening, and maybe that active reciprocity where, if we, in line with psychological safety, if we want people to open up to us, then we maybe need to consider how we too can open up a little bit of ourselves to them. And then just finally, the bit across the middle, the line across the middle is what I call the dash. And the dash, some people might have heard of this poem. It's a very famous poem of the same name, which talks about how sounds a bit morbid, but it isn't. But how when we die and on our tombstone, we have two really important dates, the date we were born and the date we died. But actually, when you think about it, the most important part of all of our lives is the dash in between the two dates. And so the dash method is a methodology for actually having the conversations that I work with organizations to show them how they can bring that to life in conversations, and the critical questions to ask and the ways to behave to really unlock the story that people want to share. And by doing so, that undoubtedly create a deeper connection between people in the workplace. And that is, of course, a huge part of the belonging piece. You know, when we feel connected to one another, like I say, we can't always articulate feelings of belonging. And so for me, it's really synonymous with connection and connectedness between one another. That's how the A-frame works from person to person in conversations.
I love that framework. I love that concept. I think it's really, really awesome. And I think a lot of our, listeners today can take that back, to their organizations and, see that through and really help, like you had said, like you had just explained, enhancing that communication, that understanding of all of those that are around us.
Right.
So, Shawn, let's bring it to Sterling and talk about our own frameworks, specifically with an employee experience. This framework promotes connecting, belonging, well-being, and caring. Can you give a little bit more detail on this framework and anything that you've learned over the time that you've put this together?
Yeah, it's a we has put it together. I will say that, and I think that's really, really important because it has evolved over time. And I think it is important that we take just a moment to realize that the place that every company is in right now is a different place than it was before the pandemic. And it had a global impact. The very notion that the ways we communicate, some of us go to an office, some of us never go to an office, some of us mix it up. We also, with that opening up of that sort of different model, it means that those connections globally, like Steve talked about, can be built in ways that we never imagined before. And as a result, we also are able to be inclusive on a multi-generational level at a different way. And so people of a more broad tapestry, I think, are finding that presence within the workforce. I start with that to say that's what helped to shape our strategy. We had tactics, but I think when we stepped in and looked at where we're at and where we want to go to truly live that value of it's all about the people, that we needed to step back and we need to say that, first of all, we need to build the connections. There's so many ways that leaders can help build the connections. There's also different communication channels, opportunities, events, et cetera. And just that day-to-day of saying, oh my gosh, I have a team that is sitting in multiple places around the world. How do I learn from that as well? How do I connect? How do I build this group of productive team members who all feel in some way connected in a way that they wouldn't if they weren't working together at Sterling, right? So that connection piece is huge to begin with. On belonging, I personally believe that's a little more self-defined in that I can't say to Caitlin, you belong, right? I can say it, but if Caitlin doesn't feel I belong, it's just hollow, right? And so I think what we have to do is consciously create those opportunities and those spaces and then demonstrate the behaviors for belonging. And that's where we help create toolkits for our managers, for our leaders, also forums for our employees, ways in which maybe we have global events from time to time, right? And then from a standpoint of well-being, that is the other piece that is so huge because, well, for many years, people talked about, get healthy, stay healthy, whether that's to be active or lose weight. Really very little conversation in the workplace about mental health until post-pandemic or during pandemic, if I should say. And as a result of that, oh, what a huge difference it makes if you can honestly and effectively address that, because that mental health, that physical health, that financial health, that sense of the fourth element community, it's so huge as well. And so, at Sterling, we have programs like we call it WOW, Working on Wellbeing. And that really is to say all of that matters in that framework. When we talk about our employee resource groups, like you mentioned before, oftentimes we will partner with those groups around helping those who are, for example, part of our caregivers network to understand the importance of well-being, belonging, connection, the resources they have from peers with one another. So I would say, Caitlin, it just makes sense for us to think about it in a strategic way around what is the culture we're trying to build, then how do we bring that to life? And then ensure that we're getting feedback to see, is it working or not? And some of that is by participation. Some of that is constantly listening and asking. And also hugely important, we need our leaders, we need our managers to be engaged as well, because that sends a huge signal that this is important, that we really believe in this, right? And so for us, that's sort of what shaped that culture. What I've learned from it is it works, and that people create a sense of team, and they create a sense of my work is fulfilling a particular space in my life that is distinct from my family, from my friends, but where I feel like I can still be the same Shawn, right? I don't have to put on my work hat. Instead, I just bring who I am, and I know there's a space for me here.
I think something that's super important that all three of you have touched on, without actually saying it, is the actual actions we need to take to create these cultures. It's not, Shawn, like what you had said of just saying, hey, you belong. Great. Day's over. Done. We're doing things. We're putting strategies into place. We're listening, actively listening, gathering the feedback and living it amongst our peers. And again, taking those actions. So again, neither of you have said those words out loud, but we're showcasing that it is taking that, that next step, that action, within the organization. So the next section that I'd like to go over is motivation. So we're getting everyone together, we're belonging, and what is the next thing of really making us want to show up, want to be here? But it's motivation beyond things like monetary incentives. So I think many of us can say that money is a big motivator. There's no denying that. But how can we dig a little deeper and find out other motivators? So Jackie, this question is for you.
Yeah, another great question. And interestingly, money it's a lack of money that demotivates, rather than money in and of itself being the sole motivator. So you're quite right that, when we all think about, money, of course, is a motivator, what we're really saying is, if I didn't have that money, I would be demotivated, right? So money and monetary reward will only kind of motivate somebody for a short period, then they get used to it or whatever. So it's really what they do with it and why the money, it matters for them in their individual situations, that counts. And, if at the time of recording, we have some latest figures from Gallup who tell us that, shockingly, only 20% of workers globally are engaged in their work, right? Now, this is really horrific and almost unbelievable to think, but we have to therefore dig deeper as to what is missing. So, and for me, I think we should redefine engagement and be calling it connection. You can already tell that this matters to me. Connection is really important because, when we use this kind of business speak and talk about engagement surveys, etc. If we started to talk about connection surveys, I think it would reframe how we felt about them, and then perhaps the weight and attention that we gave to them. So there's something in here about the fact that we might be focusing our attention and trying to motivate our people dare I say it, in the wrong way. And I'm not being personal to Sterling, because you folks have got so much of this nailed, and I wish there were more organizations like you in the world. But what I would say is, if we are looking at things, again, my work with leadership teams, it'll often be that, they default to saying, well, money is a motivator and promotion is a motivator, job titles are a motivator. Interestingly, often things outside of their control, right? Whereas actually, when we dig deeper and we look at all the studies around motivation, what we really see is people want to have a voice. They want to be recognized. They want to feel valued and appreciated. They want connection. They want to feel like they belong. And Shawn, you're quite right. We can't just say to someone you belong and they believe you and it's like, oh, that's great then. They have to feel it, and uniquely how they will feel it. So once again, how can we dig deeper? We have those conversations. We keep talking, and we use technology for good, and don't let it get in the way of those human to human interactions that they really matter. They will make the difference. And hopefully, if we're doing more of that and we're approaching the whole piece around engagement differently, we will end up as a society globally with a different result, a more engaged and a less isolated and disconnected workforce. It matters.
So yeah, no, it does. I will say that personally, one of my biggest motivators is impact. So when I come day to day, what I'm doing, what is the impact that I'm making? And hearing it and understanding it, seeing it visually sometimes, talking with leaders and things like that. So Steve, on that, my next question is for you. So for people like me, that is one of their motivators. How can leaders help these people see the impact that they're making through the lens of, the business, the strategy, financial values, everything that goes up into the business?
Yeah, I think that's it's so important. And like Jackie was saying earlier, wasn't she, that this is one of those things that we think of as kind of intangible. It's really hard to put metrics on or assess how effective we're being, because it's a feeling, right? How do you judge that? I think you're right to talk about impact, Caitlin. I tell you what I do. I go back a few more years than my first example, right? So when we formed the EMEA region, first of all, so before the EMEA region was formed at Sterling, we had a change of CEO around that time, and prior to that, we had the teams in the UK, for example, were fully dependent on the US HQ, right? And so I think of that in terms of belonging and connection, because I remember at the time, it didn't feel like the business and the people were very well connected. It felt like there was always an excuse. Well, they don't understand. They don't support this. They're not investing in this. And so people couldn't see any impact because they constantly felt blocked. Like there was a sense of we could do more than we're doing and we can't do it. And then when this change happened in our organization, which was really kind of fundamental across the whole global organization, but for the regions, EMEA and APAC, it meant that suddenly those excuses were taken away because they became accountable, right? They became a fully formed functional team. And so people then, I was leading at the time and I said, well, instead of saying that stuff, let's ask what if. What if we did this? What if we did that? What if we did? And it created this change in culture. And people were able to go, if I could do that, then this would happen. And so personal impact became front and center. And I honestly think that's central to all of this when we're thinking about impact. And as a leader, I would say to other leaders who are saying, I get it, this is nice. It's like an add-on. It would be really great when people felt like this. Look, I am a competitive commercial leader. I love to win. I care a lot about the top line. I care a lot about the bottom line. That's what I'm paid to do, right? I'm paid to run this P&L. And I have seen multiple occasions that when people are connected in, so when that change happened, people were set free. They believed something was possible. They came together as a team. Everyone belonged to this dream of let's do this super growth. And we did. In 3 years, we moved into a 3-year period of hyper growth, absolutely hyper growth. And people couldn't believe they were delivering what they were doing at that time. And I fundamentally put it down to the sense of connection and the sense of belonging to the strategy and to each other. I think that was the biggest change, the biggest driver. And so my advice would be, if you want to understand how these things are connected, like business performance and belonging, look for it. Just look for it. Like we run things like a pulse survey, which checks in on employee sentiment. You can think of that as a barometer that says, how happy are my people? How likely are people to leave? Or you could look at it and go, how invested are people in the work that we're doing together? And like through that period of change I talked about at the beginning of integrating the two regions, making the international team, we saw our employee net promoter score go up by 38 points through a period of significant change, lots of disruption. But what that said to me as the leader was, this is coming together. And alongside that, we saw the pipeline grow. We saw teams that were underperforming one year really performing it out. Like you couldn't believe the difference. And so you can sometimes as a leader go, oh, great, things are turning around. And you can neglect to look at why. And so often it's because there is a sense of belonging or connection with people that didn't exist before.
It's another great example for sure.
Yeah, you know, as Steve was saying that, I'm reminded of something that I go to a lot, and that's the power of we. And if employees see that they truly can impact the results, that they truly have the opportunity to be part of something that's working toward common goals, they're more engaged. They're more satisfied with their employment. They're realizing that their task is an important piece in a larger sort of success model. So I love that.
No, I do love that too. I love the power of we. That's great. I feel like I need to like print that out and like put it over my over my desk. I'm a big quote person, so I like seeing that. So Shawn, I'm going to stay with you for my next question because you had mentioned this earlier. You brought up the idea of, multicultural, multi-generational workforces. So do you feel that this could potentially impact finding those motivators for different groups of people?
100%. I've been in the workforce for 40 years, and this is the first company that I've worked at where the majority of the employees were not based in the United States. And so entering the company here a little over 2.5 years ago, it caused me to say, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to think about differently? I've also have a team that has a lot different experiences in the workplace than I've had, and some have been at the company much, much longer. And so when I think about how we try to successfully all build that, people first culture where we all can sort of be our best selves and really achieve things together, I think we have to recognize that people process information differently, that people may have different ways in which you have to connect with them, that you learn from them. And I love to learn. I am curious, and I like to be able to say, hey, I'm also okay with I'm sorry, but I don't use the technology that way, or I don't know how to use the technology that way. Help me out. And I think that anytime that you're in a situation where one person on a team feels they can bring value to another person on the team, that's where the magic happens, right? And so if we get too stuck in our ways, or if we sort of say, oh, but we've always done it that way, that's when we start failing. I think that's what leads to this Gallup results that's, very disheartening, is that, this has been, as we've said, a tough time for everyone to go through individually and organizationally, but this is where we are and we're not going back. So we got to figure out the path forward, and the path forward, I believe, is going to be a world in which we work differently. We have the opportunities to leverage technology in ways we haven't even imagined yet, and do it with a diverse global workforce. And for me, at this stage in my career, it's kind of like, I get it, right? It's pretty magical to have an opportunity to see that.
Okay, so Beautiful segue into our next area as my final actually topic for all of you. Let's keep on the path of the journey forward. Let's keep on the path of technology. We're going to talk about this, idea of advancing technology and adapting to it. So Shawn, I am going to stay with you here quickly. How can we balance the benefits and challenges of technology in the workforce? And I know you just had mentioned a couple of things, but
Yeah, well, it's well known that when we start defining what is a great onboarding experience, so if you're going to go out and a new member of your workforce is going to come in, one of the things that they want to know right out the bat is that they have great technology, that they can connect, and that they can do the things that they need to do to be productive right away. Just like, Steve, you were talking about, they want to know that they can make a difference, or Caitlin, that they can have an impact. So technology matters in a way more so than I think it ever has before, right? And I think from a standpoint of the channels and the tools we use, that means we have to have some platforms that are shared. That means that we have to be able to operate in a way in which we can maximize these virtual occasions to interact, physically see each other, because voices are just voices. But when you have the expression of somebody and you also are able to kind of see them as a human, that makes a big difference. And so, we're a company where we hope for and try to provide situations where people are camera on for those virtual connections. And also, when it's possible to get people together in person, even if that's sort of self-organized by local groups of people who all happen to live in the same community, so be it, right? But it's a balance that technology is such a core part of what it is that we do. And at the same time, there is a people dimension that has to have that sort of embracing of that technology, and that it's used in a way of responsibility, and also in a way that it truly, solves the problems, helps to address and understand, and we use it for feedback as well, right? So those are some of my thoughts, Caitlin. But
yeah, it's great. Steve, you have a big global team. So you've got people all over the world, literally. What are some of the techniques that you use as a leader to maintain human connections, but also trust in this remote work digital environment that we're all in?
Yeah, no, great question. Well, first of all, I don't think I could do this job with the impact I have if it wasn't virtual first. First of all, look, it's an enabler for me. Like, there's no way I could be impactful and listening to my team in Australia and the team in the UK in the same day, unless I was able to do it through technology and virtual first. So, and I think my team have embraced that as well. So I think there's an embracing of actually, there's so much difference across our group that we would not have a chance to enjoy if we weren't connected through technology and being virtual first. So we use technology intentionally. So there's lots of messaging back and forth. We concentrate hard on how we structure meetings, try and make sure that there's always time for chat, either at the beginning or at the end. My leaders and I try to show up with impact and energy wherever possible, because sometimes doing it virtually is almost an excuse to, like Shawn mentioned it, we have a camera on approach at Sterling. If you're camera off and you're just showing up, especially if it's an early or a late meeting, it's very tempting just to kind of be half there. So we're trying to show up with impact, show up with energy. I pull my entire team together every month for what I call a shout out, which is a broadcast meeting to some degree. So things that everybody needs to know, we talk about them, we talk about our results, we track progress to our strategy, we spotlight people and find out how the work they're doing is contributing to the things we said we'd do that year. We have a lot of fun and laughter. The chat explodes every time. I honestly feel like over the last year, I've been able to track kind of the performance of the team in line with the depth of the chat thing that I get. You get a file at the end of a meeting sometimes. It's like, oof, can't even read all of that. So those things for me are really important. And that's the way we drive that human connection.
I love that. I love when the chat goes off during a meeting. It's fun. You're trying to pay attention to who's presenting, but sometimes the funnest moments are within the chat there. So I think it's a great example. And I'm sure it's fun to look at it after the meeting as well. So we're talking a lot about, virtual, but, face to face is amazing. We forget about it, meeting up face to face. Jackie, can you share your thoughts on the importance of face to face conversation and how technology can facilitate or hinder it?
Yeah, of course. Another great question. I think a lot of what I would say has probably already been said by Shawn and Steve there. I think the key word that I picked up from what Shawn was saying was leverage. It's how we leverage technology for a positive impact, really. Steve mentioned I couldn't do this job without the power of technology. And technology is it's incredible, isn't it? I mean, look, we're in face-to-face conversation right now. Of course, we're not around to physically give one another a hug or whatever, although there are lots of people that don't like hugs. But, we are in face-to-face conversation nonetheless. So I love the idea of the camera on philosophy that Sterling has. And I think it's about how we, again, leverage the technology in such a way that it almost mirrors as much as we possibly can in our new environments, which, by the way, this hybrid world is here to stay. End of. And that's a good thing. But it's how we then almost mirror we would experience as best we can in an in-person environment now in the virtual space. So I love the bit about, we have some time for, icebreakers and energizers and just general chat, whatever, on a virtual meeting in the same way. I think we have to be careful that, and I'm not talking to Sterling, I'm talking to the world here or whoever's listening, but we have to be careful that technology doesn't take over and replace human interaction. And I don't mean that from kind of a sci-fi kind of way, but I mean simply, that we find ourselves having fewer and fewer actual conversations, whether that's by phone, video message, or video call, or actually in the room. And we head over to Slack or whatever kind of messaging channel you use in your workplace instead, because actually there is increasing evidence that the more digitized the world's becoming, the more disconnected actually we are becoming as humans. So, it's really important that we, Shawn, keep using this word leverage the benefits from the great technology and the advancements that we're just going to see keep moving to help us with connection. But please don't let it replace the human connection that we all want and need, that's going to help us with all those great things around our health and well-being, but also our own impact and performance in the workplace. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's really good advice, for sure. So I just do want to do a quick call to our audience. If you do have any questions, we're going to wrap up soon, so please put them in the chat if you do. So I just, my final thing for the three of you is kind of, what's next. So I'm just going to do a quick roundtable and ask all three of you, what can organizations do with the information that we shared today, the best practices, the experiences we've shared, all of that. So Steve, I will start with you.
Yeah, I think, so I'm going to speak to people in my shoes, so commercial leaders, people who are competing and trying to grow the business and those sorts of things, right? And I just reiterate what I said earlier, look for the impact of belonging. Just look for it. Look for the absence of it today, and then just take small steps. Small steps. It could be with one team, it could be with one person. And look for the impact, because I think that's what often we perceive ourselves to be too busy to do that. But it's where I honestly think the highest impact is for businesses that are looking to grow and turn around and harness ideas and innovation. Like all of that comes from our people. So look for the impact to look for the absence.
Shawn, what can organizations do with this information that they learned today?
Listen every day in every way that you possibly can, and put yourself in the perspective of the employee, not just what the company wants. And so that mindset of, here you have talent in front of you. So how can I make sure that I, as a leader, am doing the things that I can do to help that talent really bring their best to the job, right? And it's just a lot of treat others the way you would want to be treated. So.
Of course. Jackie, final thoughts for organizations listening today and what they can do next.
I think the immediate thing they can do next is they can save this recording and they can share it with their teams, because there's so much value from the insights that have been shared. So I think that's the first thing is keep watching, but also keep learning. This has been a great conversation, but 1 hour conversation is not going to change your organization out there, folks. This is a constant journey. It's an evolving journey, but it is absolutely one that not only your people will thank you for taking, but also your organizational success will thank you for taking, because culture really does eat strategy for breakfast, right? And if you've actually got a culture strategy which focuses on creating an environment where your people don't just stay, but they want to stay and they want to show up in their best possible individual way and do their best work every single day. That's the kind of organization we all want to be a part of. So keep going. Remember, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great, to finish on a quote. That's what I would say.
No, it is great, like you had just said. But yes, 57 minutes of a lot of information. Use it, but like Jackie said, use it as a part of your journey. Don't just watch this and you're like, okay, good, we're done here. It's a part of it. Use it and keep moving forward. So at this time, that's all I have for the three of you. This was a tremendous conversation. Talk about just wanting to go ahead and get your workday started now. I know I am, Shawn is. You guys are like lunchtime. So have something to eat, go on with your day. But what a great way to start the day. I hope our audience really found this valuable. They definitely did. I just want to thank the three of you. I want to thank our audience, whether you're watching live or on demand. We do actually have another Sterling Live episode tomorrow. Some more details coming on that. We're doing a lot right now, but it's great. Shawn, Jackie, Steve, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Thanks, Caitlin. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that's that. So thank you everyone for joining this episode of Sterling Live, and I will see you guys tomorrow.